Thank you, Mr Speaker. And there we have it. At the 11th hour, in the third reading, the government scrambling around so much to find a reason to pass this appalling piece of legislation that Colin King, Government Member of Parliament, has come up with yet another reason why this bill has been put before the House. And apparently it's because it's going to force the ITOs and the ITP sector to talk together. Well, I wish we could go back to the committee stages because, Mr Speaker, I sat on the Select Committee, as did Colin King, that heard this bill, and nowhere in this legislation is there any such requirement for the ITO sector and the ITP sector to meet together and discuss anything. So this, I think, demonstrates to us that the government has not a clue why it has put this legislation in place. One of its government members at the 11th hour is scrambling around trying to come up with something that makes him feel a bit better about it. But sadly, the reason he's come up with has absolutely nothing to do with the legislation, and it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious, Mr Speaker, because in scrambling around for reasons why the government is justifying this appalling piece of legislation, they are taking the community voice out of our polytechnic sector. So it would be laughable if it wasn't so serious. Because, Mr Speaker, these are challenging times. These are times where we do need a government with a specific strategy for skills and for skills development, and particularly for our young people in this country, Mr Speaker, because there are far too many of our young people ending up on the scrap heap, on the dole queues, on the unemployment benefit at the moment as we speak in this country, and that number is growing. And sadly, Mr Speaker, that number will grow significantly in the coming weeks and months as young people leave the compulsory school, the compulsory education sector, and look for training opportunities. And many of those young people will be looking to our polytechnics for those training opportunities. Unfortunately, this piece of legislation does nothing to enhance their opportunities for training. It's been well traversed in this House that the Minister who put forward this piece of legislation has been so short-sighted in her approach that she refuses to lift the caps on the number of students that can be trained through the polytechnic sector, even though there are growing numbers of people going on to the dole queue, because this Minister would rather pay the unemployment benefit for growing numbers of our young people in this country than she would have them trained and have their skills enhanced and have their opportunities in life enhanced by lifting that cap in the polytechnic sector. Instead, what she has to offer this country is this bill on the last sitting day of Parliament. And what does it do? Well, it dumbs down the community voice. That's what it does. And it particularly takes away the voice of Māori around the polytechnic councils. And I think in this day and age in Aotearoa, Mr Speaker, that is a disgrace. It's disgraceful, and it also shows us exactly where this National Party stands and its complete disregard for the Māori people and the rightful place that they have in decision-making in this country. Because yesterday, this government's telling Māori people that on one day of the year only, they can have a flag flying from some buildings, a flag that only some of them agree with, but they can't have a seat around the table. And they certainly can't have a guaranteed voice in decision-making on polytechnic councils. They can't have that on local authority bodies like the Super City. Any time that Māori actually get some real power and some real decision-making, this government shuts them down. So it's complete and utter symbolism to have a flag flying on some buildings for one day of the year, while on every occasion that this government gets the opportunity to keep and retain, because remember in this bill, Mr Speaker, they are getting rid of Māori voice around the table. It's not about, it's not as if the Labour Party and the Māori Party haven't been asking for them, and the Greens haven't been asking for them to add something that it doesn't already exist. We've been begging for them not to take away a voice that already exists for Māori around the Polytechnic Council table. And what have they done? They've completely ignored that. Symbolism of flag is not going to mean a thing if this government won't give a real voice to Māori concerns, Māori futures and Māori directions. And, Mr Speaker, that's why I was so surprised to see the Māori Party support this bill at its second reading. And I think it just shows how misguided the Māori Party in fact is. I know it was well-intentioned. they thought they could talk this government around. It was absolutely clear to every other party in this House that that was never going to happen. It was never going to happen. But in their naivety, they did believe that they had the sort of working relationship with this government where they could make a difference. Well, it was naive, and it continues to be naive that the Māori Party can trumpet a flag flying for a day, but can't get any traction when it comes to stopping this government from removing the voice of Māori from around the council table. And that's the reality, and that is the very sad position that the Māori Party sits in today. But this bill has also been used to remove the voice of students. And if there is a group who ought to have a say in the future of the Polytechnic councils and what they deliver, it is, of course, students, because they're the client after all. They're the people who the Polytechnic councils are there to serve. And yet, if you join the dots between this piece of legislation put forward by the Minister of Education and another piece of legislation being promoted by this government, happens to be a private member's bill in the name of Sir Roger Douglas, of making student union membership voluntary, join the dots and see what's happening to the student voice in this country, Mr Speaker, because there's a common theme and it is about dumbing down the voice of students. And that really alarms me, because I wonder what it is that the Minister of Education and her government have coming forward for tertiary education if they are taking such major steps right now to dumb down the student voice. But it's not just the student voice that will no longer necessarily be around the Polytechnic Council table. It is also representation of women. Because while they were not specifically prescribed for in the current legislation that we are fortunately still working to, most of the gender representation of women on Polytechnic councils came from the staff reps and the student reps. And they are no longer mandated, or will no longer be mandated after the 1st of May next year, to be sitting around that council table. So I really fear for the gender balance on those councils. And why is that important? Well, Mr Speaker, it is the Polytechnics that train all of our nurses. It is the Polytechnic sector that train all of our early childhood education educators, our teachers. And it is that sector that actually provides trades opportunities for many, many women. And so the voice of women around the Polytechnic Council is incredibly important. And I'm so surprised to see that a government that's busy telling private business to get its act together and increasing women on their boards is doing everything in its power legislatively to ensure that there is not such a strong voice for women around the boards and the councils that it has control over. I'm also concerned about industry and the removal of the industry voice from around the Polytechnic Council, because if there is one criticism that we sometimes hear about our tertiary institutions, it's this, that sometimes they care more about the academic achievements and not so much, they're not so connected with industry and what industry needs in terms of skills shortages and in terms of its training needs. Well, this bill takes away the Business New Zealand representation and the union representation from around the table. So the very people who have the intimate knowledge of what the local workforce looks like no longer around that table. And I fail to see, Minister, how that improves educational opportunities, how it improves training outcomes, and how it improves employment opportunities for our young people in the Polytechnic sector. Mr Speaker, in closing, I guess I just want to say that I think we've seen this before in this country and it's been a dismal failure. This is going back to the dim, dark days of the 1990s, because the last time that government tried this on, it was with our hospital boards. Because they appointed all of the hospital boards, they took away community representation then, and what an utter shambles that was. It was the forerunner to user pays, and it was the forerunner to privatisation. Mr Speaker, I hope I'm wrong, but I see that around the corner for our Polytechnic sector council as well. I'm proud to stand up here as a Labour Party member and oppose the third reading of this shocking bill.